some questions to get things started, and we'll hit the ground running. Actually, I think I want to work backwards, so I'll start with Jeremiah, because I want to start with what I found to be such a beautiful and transcendent ending. And I haven't read Justin Torres's book, but I wonder, can you talk about where the ending, that final dramatic image comes from? Is it from the book, or is it adapted, or where did the...
The shadow, you mean?
Yeah.
So the end of the book is upright, upright, I say, I swear, I pray. That's the end of the book. And we were trying to figure out a visual image that would represent that. And since it was so ephemeral, we wanted to build it into the DNA of the movie. So shadows were really important to me from the beginning, I think, because in a shadow you can't see who the person is, you can just see the form of what the person can be. You know what I mean? In many ways. So the boys see it in the very beginning when they're pounding on the plates, and then the boys see their own shadows and Pops' shadow as he disappears into the night. And so the shadows transform as the narrative transforms, right? So as the boys realize that the fragility of their union, the shadows change from 3 to 1. So Pops is the first time they see a single shadow, and then Jonah in the end becomes his own shadow, right? And he stands, you know, that upright. He stands, and then he becomes, I say, I swear, I pray. And how do you transform that visually with sort of where that floating shadow came from? His saying, swearing, praying.
Well, it's a beautiful way to interpret that. Just as a follow-up to that, to touch on the novel. Has anyone here read Justin Torres's novel? Is someone down here? A few people? Okay, good. Just curious. Maybe Jeremiah, you could talk a little bit about your decision to adapt this book, and where did that come from? What did it mean to you? How did it cross your path?
So I read the book at McNally Jackson. They have a We Recommend pile. And it was
the bookstore down in Soho.
Soho, yeah. Have you guys been there? Yeah. Sweet. So I read the book. It was on the We Recommend pile, and I opened the first page. I had just gotten back from editing a movie called The Square, which was here at the New York Film Festival. Yeah. And I was one of the many editors on that movie. And I thought I was an Egyptian revolutionary when I was editing that movie. I was like, I was in Egypt, and I was just convinced that was my path. And then I was in New York, and they didn't have the budget to fly me back. And I was like, I guess I'm not an Egyptian revolutionary. And I was thinking about what I was so deeply passionate about, and what I could feel like was my own revolution. And as I was, those very cathartic thoughts were going through my head, I picked up that book and read the first page, and I went into the cafe and I read the whole book. I hadn't paid for it yet. I did eventually pay for it.
In one sitting, you just sat down.
Yeah, well, it's short. It's 130 pages, and some of the pages are like 4 or 5 lines long because they're the end of the chapter. And I bought 4 or 5 copies, so I did not rob McNally Jackson. And I called Justin and I said, I want to make your book into a movie. I think I emailed him, and then I called him. I think he sent me his phone number, and we met. And I told him the way I wanted to make the movie, and he was in. He was like,
immediately in, or how did he respond initially?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got kind of drunk, and I think then he was in. Yeah, it was a good introduction. He brought along like a bodyguard who was like a young editor friend of his, and to make sure that I wasn't a super creep. And
it's like a first date, it sounds like.
It was very much a first date, and we all got drunk together, and we all liked each other, and we liked. And then I think I sent him in a dream, and I think, which was, my first film. And it deals with similar thematics of family and brutality and love, and a chronicling of one's family, and a transformation of one's family into catharsis. And I think he was like, oh, I get that you get me. And I was like, I totally get you, and I get this book, and I want to do it, and I want you to be as involved as possible. And I think at first he was a little skeptical. He was like, I don't know, you could fuck this whole thing up. And so he like slowly but surely became really involved in the process. So like as scripts started to come in and the scripts were better and better and better, he started to be like, I want to be involved in this process, up to the point where he was in, he was involved in every draft of the script, and then he was in the casting sessions with us, which sort of brings you.
So I want to get to that then
guy.
because, congratulations, first of all, Raúl, on an amazing performance. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
This notion of family and brutality and all of this that Jeremiah is talking about, I wonder to what extent, or I wonder what it was about this role and about all of these issues and topics that most resonated with you. Can you remember when you first read it, what jumped out at you, or your initial response, your reaction?
I think when I first picked up the script, when it was sent to me, I saw two white guys' names on the
Who are these Jewish guys writing around? What the
on the
hell?
cover, and I started reading it, and I didn't give much thought. Whatever, I started reading the script, and then this character pops, and at first he was doing things that I was perplexed by, and the story itself, the form of it perplexed me. The script, I think, is very emblematic of the rhythm and the pace of the actual film, and at first he did these things that I thought could easily be interpreted as tropes or stereotypes. So, but then the world became so rich in the script. And I said, this has to have some source material. And I flipped back to the front page and I saw it based on the novel by Justin Torres. I was like, oh, there's a Latino name right there. And I Googled the novel and I educated myself a little bit more on its journey and on Justin's journey. And then I finished reading the script, and I mean, I honestly didn't think they would cast me in a million years, so I kind of went to the audition and said, fuck it, I really like this scene. It's really a dynamic scene, but they're never going to cast me. I don't think they're going to cast me, but I really like this scene. It's really fun, so let me go in there and have some fun. And then because I just fell in love with the story, I found that it sort of transcended the stereotypes or the tropes that I thought it was at first. It became so rich and complex, and continued to defy my expectations as I flipped the pages. And then after I met with Jeremiah and they sort of loosely offered me the role, I finally read the novel and fell in love with it. And with Justin's voice, I think he's an incredible writer, and I thought that Jeremiah and Dan did such a great job of adapting it to film and staying loyal to the novel.
Why didn't you think they would cast you?
I don't know, man. You go through all these things as actors, and you have all these hang-ups or whatever. I don't know. There's all these different things that I just convinced myself. But it's a testament. The writing was so good that I auditioned with the scene that we now refer to as the big dick truck scene, where Pops comes back with this truck, and Ma gets in his face, and it's such a dynamic scene, and it's so playable, and it's so immediate and visceral. And it sort of incorporated so many elements that attract me to acting, and it ultimately, the scene was so good that I just wanted to go and do the scene. And I get one opportunity to perform this scene. All right, I'll do it in this dusty room up in Midtown. Like, that's fine with me. It's a great scene. And then they brought me back and saw me again, and then.
We made him do it like a bunch of times, but the truth is that Raúl was handicapped from the beginning. Like, Justin and I had loved his work. He doesn't know how famous he actually is, or he sort of does, but then sometimes he doesn't. It's like, it's a humility that is part of what makes him such a wonderful actor. But Justin and I had seen his work, and we'd known how amazing he was. And then when he did the audition, it was a no-brainer. I mean, that it was like I wanted him to be Pops, but I wasn't sure he was the right dude. I actually thought, it's funny because he's so, he has so much humility now and so much humility then, but I didn't know that. You don't know what an actor's gonna be like when you audition them. And then we sat down and we had lunch together, and I was like, this guy is the best. this guy is like, he's just so sweet and so honest, and he was so down. I think you had to be really down for this movie. It was like, it was going to be so intimate, and you weren't going to get paid any money, and it was going to be complicated, and so you had to be down. And he loved the material, and he came to my house and he did a scene with my son. He was 3 months old at the time, in the bathtub, which is in the movie. It was so good it made it into the movie. And we also had a mutual friend. We had my cinematographer, Nady Gomez, who shot a film, that I did right before this, that was at Sundance, called Captivated, was down to shoot it with us. And it was me, Nady, my son, and Raúl, and my wife, and we were all in a bathtub, or Raúl was in the bathtub, and my son was in the bathtub. But it was like this incredibly intimate moment, and you knew right then that this was the right guy for this kind of a movie, because no matter what, no matter how horrible a thing he did, it was going to be impossible to hate him. And I think that's sort of the missing link with really abusive men. It's like, abusive men are not the monsters we want to make them out to be. They're actually incredibly charming and very lovable people, and that's what makes their abuse all the more difficult, you know what I mean, to internalize. That's what keeps you coming back. That's what keeps children coming back, and that's what keeps their wives coming back, is that they're incredibly charming and loving people.
Maybe the two of you could elaborate on that and sort of finding the right balance, because there's a certain amount, and it's coming across in your portrayal, Raúl, of just wanting this guy to get it right, and wanting to be sympathetic even when he makes perhaps the wrong choices in certain moments, or consistently making certain choices. Can you talk about the collaboration between the two of you, and how you sort of found that, how you challenged yourselves to sort of play with that balance? Or did you push it further at times and then pull it back? Or how did you sort of navigate that together?
I mean, I will say there's certain scenes in the book that didn't make it into the movie because the brutality was, you were able to imagine in different ways in the book, and in the movie, when you saw it on screen, it became overwhelming. That being said, it was also a climax that the movie, the most brutal moment had to be the moment that Jonah inflicted on himself. And so there were some scenes in the book that were more physically brutal than that moment, and those had to come out. And Justin and I talked about why those scenes needed to be removed for that reason. But in terms of like the balance that we were trying to achieve, I think what Raúl understood, and that Justin is incredibly sympathetic to and aware of, is the cycle of violence, how violence gets passed on from one generation to another, and the real tragedy of that cycle. And I think Raúl understood that. I mean, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think, it's in the novel, in essence. I mean, it's very raw and honest, but it's also very much it feels like a love letter in certain ways. I think it's an attempt to try to understand what happened, his youth, even though it's fictional. It's fiction. It's very much based on his life, and having access to Justin very much made himself available and was able to answer a lot of questions for me and sort of humanize his own father for me. But also that's in the novel. It's written with such love, and the characters are brutal, but they're also tender. They're so complex, and there's so many things. There's not just one thing. It's not just this brutality. It's like I mean, I've said this time and again, but I think that I don't believe that there's, with few exceptions, that there's good or bad people. I think we all do. We all make good and bad choices, and I think that's where I had to come at Pops from, understanding that and trying to understand him as a man and use empathy as a tool to come to this character.
Let me switch gears for a minute and talk about, I was saying to you as we were coming into the theater at the end here that the film just not only sounds so beautiful, but looks really amazing on this screen, and you shot on film. I thought it'd be worth just having you elaborate on why shooting on film was important. I mean, it really, I think, elevates the material in a way that we don't see a lot on the big screen anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we shot on film so that we can play in places like this. I think, that's sort of like, the number one thing. It's like, I grew up going to the movie theaters, and I still, I don't even have a TV. I just go to the movies. I just want to go to the movies. I want an immersive sonic and visual experience, and I want a tangible visual experience. So I think the problem for me with digital video is you can't touch it. It doesn't look tangible. You don't feel it. It's like, it sits so flat on the screen. The grain sits flat on the screen, but film is silver halide, and and we wanted you to see it. We wanted a film where you could like really feel it, where the grain was so thick that you could almost touch it. And the same with the animation. We wanted the paper to be tangible. We wanted the entire movie to be tangible. So that was vital for us. And then there's another thing that film does, whereas it makes the process precious, because the material is precious, the process becomes precious. So the way you call out a film shoot is like this incredibly religious moment every time it happens. It's like that moment where you hear the mag snap in and rolling, and you hear the mag spin up, and the actors are aware of that too. I mean, I think Raúl could speak to that. And so that you're only going to get a couple shots at this because it's too expensive. We're not a Hollywood movie, and that's an exciting thing for a film crew to be operating under that kind of pressure is thrilling, and that kind of value is thrilling.
I don't think I've asked an actor specifically about what Jeremiah is getting at, but from your perspective, are you thinking about your performance differently? Are you thinking about your time on set or in a scene differently, or are you thinking about takes differently? How are you thinking about these things differently?
It's definitely more heightened. It's a different kind of experience. But at the same time, I never felt like we were limited. I felt like we got a lot of takes. I felt that the camera was rolling and catching stuff often accidentally, or like, I never felt like, sometimes because of economics you're sort of limited, but I did feel like we were allowed to play quite a bit and find in other experiences I'm working on film, I feel like you get your one or two takes and people are very precious about it, whereas I felt like Jeremiah was very playful in his approach and very somewhat liberal, like I think with the use of the film, and I never felt any kind of pressure. If they felt it, we never felt it.
Right.
We felt complete freedom, and it felt like the cameras were always rolling, or constantly rolling, at least. But there is it is a special experience working on film. I think so. Just the tangibility of it. I think it sort of heightens it.
Raúl, I asked you about the relationship you built with Jeremiah, and you talked about working with him, but maybe elaborate on the relationship you built with these boys and developing that, and maybe just some of the ways that you guys collaborated. What do you feel like they learned from you? What did you learn from them? Maybe you could share some of that experience of being on set with them.
I mean, it was one of the most unique shooting experiences that I've had, working with 3 young people who are non-actors, who've never, stepped foot on a professional film set, or even an amateur one at that, I don't think. And there was a sort of wildness and rawness and authenticity and honesty to their performances. It didn't feel that they were performing. I think one of the greatest assets we have as artists and as actors is the power of our imagination. And your ability to manipulate that, and I think kids do that on a daily basis. As an adult, you're actually sometimes as an adult actor, you're constantly trying to go back to childhood and what that was, to use these imaginary given circumstances and play within those. I did that all throughout my youth. I was always playing some imaginary circumstances and trying to live truthfully in that, right? So they kept Sheila and I on our toes, and we had constantly talked about that because they were, in essence, just listening and responding. That's what was. They weren't there regurgitating rehearsed lines, how they had rehearsed it with their mom the night before or something like that, which is typical for a child actor. I mean, it's got to be tough for any kid to walk on a film set. But Jeremiah really was intent on working with the boys months before we got up to Utica to shoot the film. We were having, meals together and playing soccer together and getting our hair cut together doing acting exercises together and really developing a chemistry with Sheila and the three boys and myself. And so Sheila and I always spoke about how they kept us honest. And now as far as how we affected them, the film was shot, the bulk of it was shot in the summer of 2016. And I think it was like sort of boot camp for these three young boys. Like they learned, and they had like 60 parents on set because everyone in that crew was parenting these kids. Everyone loved these kids and doted on them, and they took advantage of that wholeheartedly. They loved it. But they were learning what it was. And they had a great acting coach, Noel Gentile, who worked with them for months before. And to Jeremiah's credit, he was wise enough to kind of bring someone on who had experience working with kids in an acting environment. And then we shot those 6 weeks in 2016, and then we went back in the winter of 2017, February 2017, and shot another portion of winter, and the boys a little bit more mature. And you could see their experience. Like they knew how to remove their microphones by that point. They were taking off their microphone packs and like doing the clapboard, and they had already developed a sense of a professionality. It was a real boot camp for them. It was incredible.
They did this thing. They would watch Raúl and Sheila. Raúl and Sheila, when they would get into the zone, they would like listen to music. They would like get into their zone and like listen to music and like shut the world out. And in the summer, the boys were like not interested. They were like, "What the hell are they doing?" And by the winter, they were like, "I need my music. Excuse me. I just need to get into my space and my music. Excuse me."
So before we ask the audience for a couple questions, Jeremiah, I'd love to hear the other side of what Raúl was just talking about, and that is the idea of having someone who's as good and as trained as Raúl and as Sheila, mixed with these kids who are new to being on a set, new to acting, harnessing all of that, balancing all of that. Maybe you could reflect on sort of navigating all of that to make it all work.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is I had no idea what I was doing, and I was I had never directed actors before, and I had gone to the Sundance Labs, and Ed Harris he had been my kind of coach.
Your background is in documentaries.
My background's in yeah, exactly. And he was like, "Just tell them what you want," and I was like, "Jesus, Ed, how do I do that?" And he's an intense dude. Yeah. And he I think he was like, "You know what you want. So you just have to help them get you where they want." And I think the truth is I didn't know how to help them get me where I wanted. But they were so experienced, Raúl and Sheila, that they were able to show me their own techniques, and I was able to trust them. I just was able to trust them to get to where we wanted to go. With the boys, what was cool is they didn't know that I didn't know, So I could kind of tell them anything and they would trust me, which was thrilling. And then I also had just had a son. He's in the movie. That's his birth, and that's him in the bathtub, and that's him with Raúl and sort of the found footage stuff. And when he wasn't on set for most of the days, he was with a babysitter, and so in a way, I started to think of the boys as like what my son would become, and I wanted to take care of them like that, I wanted to make sure that they weren't going to get hurt, and they were going to be okay, and yet they were going to do dangerous, exciting things that I felt like would enrich their lives, It's like all those things started to kind of meld together and blur, and it was beautiful. It was a really, strange and beautiful experience, and exhausting.
I bet. Okay. Well, let folks in the audience ask a couple questions. If you do have, I think we have a microphone. Yes. So we'll go right here, gentleman right there. Hi, and then we'll work our way back.
I appreciate your documentary history. I'm a documentary filmmaker also, and I've been doing a lot of documentaries on people who have mental challenges and have a socialization like what your film talked about. And I've been with a bunch of people recently, and I was feeling I couldn't take them to your film because they would be triggered by this experience, because a lot of people have early childhood trauma. What do you say to them?
Don't take them. I mean, I I think the movie. I mean, the movie is an intense experience. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that it's a very dense, difficult movie. I mean, like I think all my movies are like that. I love movies like that. I love really difficult movies. I love really difficult books. I love really overwhelming, rich, nuanced work. And I think that's why I was so drawn to Justin's book. It was so unafraid. And the flip side of fearless work is that often it can be too painful for people. And I think, you know, you can be aware of that, especially for, you know, the people you're working with. I will say that my father is a little bit off, and so with many people in my family, and often when they see their own pathos reflected on screen, it can actually be cathartic. And I think that, for me, was what was so moving about the book, that it reminded me of my family, and I hadn't seen that before or felt that before written in words, and it was meaningful for me. So I think it can go either way, but I think you should certainly be careful.
Thank you.
Can we go down up here in the fifth row? Hi.
Hi. Well, thanks for the film. There's a lot there to process and sort out, and I realize, you know, like, the film doesn't have to answer this, but I'm just wondering, for both of you, what sort of future do you imagine for these boys, particularly sort of the protagonist? Because I mean, the school is not part of it, apparently. I mean, I mean, we don't see them involved in any sort of.
He goes to a very good college.
Okay.
I mean, that's actually sort of true. I mean, I think, you know, the beauty of the book is that the book is told in first person, so you're able to understand that in the future there will be a future for this young man. And I think that's the key, is that, you know, he has chronicled his family and he has freed himself in a way from the cycle that his family is going through. So that much is clear, but that's all that's clear. And I think, you know, that's all that's clear for the other boys too. You know, it's like they are in that cycle, and maybe one day they'll free themselves and maybe one day they won't, you know, but where they are now is they're within that cycle. Sure.
There's a question almost all the way in the back. Yep, yes. Just wait for the mic.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was a very moving and effective movie, so thank you. There was one thing that puzzled me, and I wondered to what degree it was a choice or how you approached it. The journal that he was keeping, or the journals with the drawings, there was writing, a lot of writing there, which we saw him write a little bit. The penmanship looked like an adult's handwriting, and the drawings, of course, were beautiful and obviously a very talented artist. Was it a choice was the decision to portray him as an extraordinarily talented person? You might have, I haven't read the book, and maybe the way he speaks in the book betrays that kind of sophistication. But in the movie, we only see him as a little boy, and then he's got this extraordinary handwriting and magnificent art.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's layers to the film. So I think, you know, on the first watch, that should be a question, you know, ideally the film brings you to the book, that they're a companion, that they speak to each other. Actually what you're reading, this is sort of a secret, but I'm going to tell you because you're here at Lincoln Center. The secret is that what he's writing is the book. So our animator wrote out the entire book word for word. So what you're reading is the exact, or what's on the screen is Justin's novel. And so what we're saying is in this book is the future. Does that make sense? So what you're seeing is a fever dream. What you're seeing is a memory of a dream. And so the book, though it may feel real, is not real in a weird way. Maybe a little heady. But ideally, it's hidden enough that you're able to lose yourself in the movie. And hopefully that's the case. Yeah, I'll go with that. But I think, it's also, he could also be an exceptional young man. All those things are possible.
I wonder if we have time for maybe one right here. I'm going to have to wrap up in a moment. Hi.
Hi, love the film. I have a really simple question. How many days did you shoot with the constraints of independent filmmaking and shooting on film and shooting with children?
I think we shot a total of 44 days without some random, times when we would just, shoot in our office. We shot 27 days in the summer and then 7 days in the winter. The hardest part of that was that we had to have actors that were dedicated enough to come back in the winter. And we did. And Raúl, this is funny, because it's kind of funny. Raúl was like, I have a whole new haircut. And I was like, awesome. He was like, I look totally different. I was like, great. And then that was like a beautiful thing, that there was change that took place. That was really the important thing. And the other thing is you had to have Cinereach, who funded the movie. They were so excited about the possibilities of that. You have to have a funder who's willing to let you see 1,000 kids for a year and a half, and let you do that kind of stuff. That's excited about the impossibilities of filmmaking, the things that other studios won't do.
Let's do one more. I think there was right here, and will be the last question.
Hi, I loved it. This is for Raúl. I just wondered about your process in creating his physicality and just the look and the energy of the character, which is clearly different from who you are right now. It was just a wonderful transformation. So I just wondered about your approach.
Thank you. There's a lot of physical description in the novel and in the script. Particularly in the novel, our narrator, who is Jonah in our movie, who has no name in the book itself, sort of reflects a lot on his father's physicality, his muscles, his sort of the way he carries himself, and so I knew that physically that gave me something to ground myself in, and then also the era. It's, sort of late 80s, early 90s. My girlfriend was sort of making fun of me the other day. She was saying that whenever I get a new character, I always start with the haircut, which is kind of, there's a lot of truth to that. But I wanted to make him look as different as myself. But also, Justin made himself so available to us throughout the process, and I got, even though it is fiction, it's based on his real life, and I got photos of his father, and so looking at the haircuts and the mustaches of the era, and starting from there. But really, the physicality of it all was really important. That transformation as far as that. But it pays to have a great collaborator who's willing to let you play and give you freedom, because sometimes. I will say this about the process of making this movie was that a lot of times filmmaking is so constrained by economics, and you're under the gun, and people. For me, I went to theater school, and you go to theater school and they teach you to be experimental and playful and really think outside of the box, and then you get out into the industry, out into the world, and everyone's so making decisions based on money, so everyone loses their sense of play and their sense of exploration. And Jeremiah, from the get-go, was intent on exploring and playing and getting dirty and messy. And that, for me, one of the greatest things, and for an actor who has never worked with, for a director who's never worked with actors, one of the best things that any director can say is when you ask them a question is they say, I don't know. And that's great. It's like, let's figure it out together. To me, one of the things I hate is a lot of young directors will kind of try to bullshit their way out of an answer. And once you start bullshitting me, well, then I feel like I can't trust you. But if you tell me I don't know, I'll do anything for you, you know? And I feel like that was the entire process for me.
My greatest asset was that I was an idiot, which is true. It's sort of true. But I will say this too, that Raúl also added. He's not Puerto Rican. He's Mexican, and he worked with friends of his to make sure that there were specific Puerto Rican colloquialisms that he was using and an accent that he was using and things that Justin and I Justin, who wrote the book, were unaware of, actually. And now when Puerto Rican people see the movie and they've come up to me and they've said, you know, that Puerto Rican actor you had was so incredible, and it makes me so proud of what he did. You know, it's like he tricked you, and I didn't even know he was doing that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, We the Animals opens in theaters this weekend, so if you liked it, and I think most of you did, please tell a friend and support this movie on its opening weekend. And let's thank
thank you so
Jeremiah
much.
and Raúl for being with us tonight.